Hi guys, this is the third lecture for the cardiovascular system, and today we're talking about blood vessels. So the essential question is, explain how the anatomy of blood vessels enables them to move blood through the body. And by the end of this lecture, you should be able to answer this question using all of the words shown here. I just want to point out that in this vocabulary, I did write the word arteries and arterioles in red. I wrote the words venules and veins in blue, and I wrote the words capillaries in purple. And hopefully you realize that this is to indicate that this is where you would see oxygenated blood. This is where you would see deoxygenated blood. And then the capillaries is where the blood would actually lose the oxygen to become deoxygenated. So let's start with an overview of blood vessels. And this is called the cardiovascular system because the prefix cardio means heart and the suffix vascular means blood vessel. So if you take out the heart from the equation and you just look at the blood vessels in the body, it's called the vascular system. So this is what delivers blood to the tissues to nourish them, and it brings the deoxygenated blood back. And at this point, the blood is also devoid of nutrients. It's already delivered the glucose and other nutrients to the tissues, and so it will pick that up again as it passes through the intestines. You can think of the vascular system as similar to a metropolitan road system. You would have large freeways, but then you'd also have major highways that are not as large as a freeway that then feed into smaller streets. And then you would even have small alleys that connect individual houses to those streets. The 5 different types of blood vessels are going from largest to smallest and then back to largest, are arteries, arterioles, capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels, and then venules and veins. And the arteries and arterioles here are labeled with an A, and the venules and veins here are labeled with a V. And just keep in mind that the ones that are labeled with A's take blood away from the heart, and the ones that are labeled with V's bring blood back to the heart. So here is a model of those different blood vessels. You have the major arteries here that branch out from the aorta, and then those branch off into smaller arterioles, which then connect to small little capillaries that all kind of interconnect with each other. And you should imagine that you have a bunch of cells here in all of this white space. So the cells would be filling up this empty space, being fed by the capillaries. So oxygen and glucose and other nutrients would leak out of the capillaries, feed the cells, and then waste would leak out of the cells and go into the capillaries. At this point, because the blood is deoxygenated, it's now going to be shown as blue in the model. Just keep in mind, blood is not actually blue in real life. It's more of a dark red or like a scarlet color. But then we're going to use blue to show it in our models because that makes things easier to differentiate. So now this deoxygenated blood is going to drain from the capillaries into venules here and also here. And then the venules drain into larger veins, which eventually drain into the vena cava, which goes into the heart. So blood vessels, the actual tissue that makes up the blood vessels themselves, come in 3 layers, and we call these tunics because tunic is essentially the, I think is it Latin? It's the word for coat. So you have the tunica intima, which is the most intimate coat. It's the one that's closest to the blood. You have the tunica externa, which means it's the most external tunic. And then you have the tunica media, which is in the middle. And this is the important layer. It's the one that's made of smooth muscle. And so that means that the tunica media is actually able to contract, which helps the blood to move in the direction it needs to. Also, please notice that the tunica media, the smooth muscle of the tunica media, is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. So when you're in flight or fight mode, then your blood vessels are going to either constrict if it's to blood vessels that go to like your digestive tract, or other parts of the body that are not absolutely necessary for survival in that moment. Or the sympathetic nervous system might trigger those blood vessels to dilate, meaning they become bigger so that more blood can flow to places like your skeletal muscle or your eyes or your lungs, the regions of the body that are absolutely necessary to function at highest efficiency when your life is in danger or when you're under stress. So here you can see what those layers look like. We have the fibrous outer layer of this artery. So this is an artery on the left. So we have the fibrous tunica externa, and it's just there to protect the blood vessel. You have the very, very thin tunica intima, and then in between them you have the thick tunica media. And if you look at the cutaway part of it, hopefully you can see those lines. That's an individual blood vessel, or I'm sorry, an individual smooth muscle cell right there. And that would be its nucleus right there. And so all of these smooth muscle cells make up that middle layer, and they can constrict, they can contract to then constrict the blood vessel, which would then narrow the lumen of this artery. So you'd have less blood able to flow through it. Or they could relax, which would open the lumen of this artery, which would then allow more blood to flow through it. And hopefully you realize that the word lumen means that empty space in the blood vessel. So blood then now can flow out of the artery through the arterioles into the capillary network here. And the capillary network, you can see a cutaway down here. It's literally just one layer of cells that make up the walls of it. So it's just the tunica intima, and that's it. There's no smooth muscle on the outside. There's no fibrous tunica externa. There is a basement membrane. It's a very, very thin membrane that just adds a little bit more protection, but it really all it is just a single layer of cells, tunica intima. That's it. Because the capillary walls are so thin, oxygen and nutrients can leak out, waste products can come in, and then the capillaries will deliver that deoxygenated blood through the venules into the vein. And then here once again we see the tunica externa, that fibrous layer that makes up the outside to protect it. You can see the tunica intima, and then you can see the tunica media, that smooth muscle that's controlled by the sympathetic nervous system right there. You guys also, we're going to talk about the arteries versus the veins in more depth at the end of this lecture, but just take a few seconds right now to make a comparison. So if you compare what arteries look like versus what veins look like, hopefully a few things are jumping out at you all at once. The first would be you might realize that the actual tunica media, the muscle wall, is much thicker in the artery than in the veins. Another would be that the lumen of the artery is smaller compared to the lumen of the vein. And then another thing you might have noticed is that the veins have these valves here, and the arteries do not. And then last of all, here the blood is flowing down away from the heart, and here the blood is flowing up towards the heart. Obviously, that's only true if we're talking about the part of the body that's below the heart. So if we're talking about the head and neck, it would be flipped. But you get the idea. Blood is flowing away from the heart. Blood is flowing back towards the heart. So we'll compare and contrast the arteries and veins again at the end of this lecture.